Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest webinar from Eurostat. This webinar follows the release of the Eurostat 2024 SDG monitoring report, so monitoring the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's a lot in there, and I'm sure that we will have an interesting next hour. I'm Christine Meyer, and I'm working in Eurostat in the unit Environmental Statistics and Accounts and Sustainable Development, and I will moderate the event today. Please be aware that we are recording the event. There will also be an interactive opportunity, and we will use the tool Slido. I'm sure you all know by now. You can ask questions and we will deal with them later in a panel discussion. You can see the code on the screen, and in case you want to go in and put comments or questions. So the code is hashtag 20897836, and the link is also available on the Eurostat streaming page. So now we can dive into the topic of today's webinar, sustainable development. The UN Sustainable Development Goals have been adopted in 2015. So this means that we are already in the second half of the 2030 agenda. And therefore, it will be interesting to see what we have achieved so far and where we have to double down our efforts. As the Sustainable Development Goals can only be achieved by all countries working together, I'm particularly pleased to have today also a speaker from the UN Statistical Division, Yong Min, who joins us from New York. But we will start with Arturo de la Fuente from Eurostat. He is the acting director for sectoral and regional statistics. So over to you, Arturo.
Thank you very much, Christine. Dear all, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this Eurostat webinar devoted to the 2024 Eurostat SDG Progress Report. It's a report that we published 2 days ago, and I am happy to see that so many of you join us today to learn about this report and the rest of the communication package and to have a discussion with us about it. I want to start saying a word about the global and EU setting for SDGs. Christine already explained that, or remind us that the UN adopted in September 2015 the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And as such, this is the world's roadmap for achieving sustainable development by the end of 2030. The European Union has fully committed itself to delivering on the 2030 agenda, and the SDGs form an intrinsic part of the European Commission work program and the political guidelines of the current Commission, the outgoing Commission, because as you know, there will be a new Commission in a few weeks after the European elections. I want to say a word about the setting of the EU policies for achieving SDGs, a little bit, but not much, because it's a little bit beyond the mandate of Eurostat, but it sets the context. The SDGs have been progressively integrated in the European semester, which is the Commission annual cycle for economic policy coordination. The EU has many and deeply transformative initiatives to deliver on different dimensions of sustainable development. Some examples are as follows. In the social dimension, we have the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan. In the European dimension, we have the European Green Deal, the 8th Environmental Action Programme, and the European Climate Law. And to strengthen the economic dimension, a new economic governance framework has just entered into force. Prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic, the EU adopted at record speed the Next Generation EU. This is a common instrument to fund the recovery and to speed up the green and digital twin transitions. And in response to the global energy market disruption caused by the Russia's war against the Ukraine, the European Commission presented the Repower EU plan to make the EU independent from Russian fossil fuels well before 2030 and to accelerate our transition towards clean and sustainable energy. So what is Eurostat's role in all this setup? Eurostat's role is to provide high-quality statistics to monitor progress. We are a statistical office. The objective monitoring is an essential component to achieve the 2030 Agenda's vision, both globally and in the EU. And Eurostat has the mandate to monitor progress towards the SDGs in an EU context, and for this reason has prepared annual SDG reports since 2017. In a time when it is so easy to spread fake news and unverified news, it's essential to have trustworthy sources of high-quality factual data. And Eurostat is a reference for objective, high-quality statistics in this context. We in Eurostat work in close cooperation with national and EU administrations, including national statistical institutes of the member states, the Commission Joint Research Centre, and the European Environmental Agency. So what is new in the 2024 monitoring report? Many of you probably know every year the European Commission reviews the set of SDG indicators to keep them relevant and to make use of the latest data sources, while respecting continuity to the extent as possible with previous reports. We also did that in 2024. The indicator selection reflects the UN SDGs broad objectives and ambitions with a focus on statistical quality and policy relevance for the EU. Correspondingly, we introduced several new indicators and we removed others in 2024. New policy targets or refinements of definitions were also taken on board. Eurostat used the most recent data for the assessment. For most indicators, that meant using data for the years 2022 or 23. For poverty indicators, we refer to income data in the year 2021. This means that the impacts of the COVID pandemic are fully visible now in the report, and more recent developments, such as those caused by Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, are mostly reflected too. The Eurostat SDG report includes an in-depth analysis of the indicators as well as references to the relevant EU policy documents. We have a chapter about short-term trends using quarterly and monthly data. It looks in more detail to increases in consumer prices, the EU's diversification of energy imports, and other recent developments. And we have the chapter on spillover effects that in the 2024 report is complemented with information on how the EU is performing globally from an SDG perspective. So besides the SDG progress report, Eurostat also published 2 days ago at the same time a whole communication package, including a visual brochure with key statistics and figures, an interactive digital publication in our website, offering a more playful approach to explore the indicators, a graphical interactive tool of the SDGs in every country at country level, as well as the situation of individual member states compared to the EU. You can see how the countries progress, and you can compare countries if you open the same tool into browser windows in your computers. You can compare. And there is also a dedicated section on the Eurostat website with the indicator tables, explanations, methodology, and much more. And finally, we also have a number of articles, complementary articles that we call Statistics Explained. So to conclude, this was just a quick overview of the report and the rest of the information package that Eurostat released 2 days ago. This is what we are presenting today. I encourage you all to go and consult this material. I wish you all an informative reading and for now, a stimulating event today and a lively discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arturo, for leading us in and outlining the political background for the SDG monitoring, and also explaining the number of tools which are available for getting all the information. Thanks a lot. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Young Min, Chief of SDG Monitoring of the United Nations Statistical Division, who joins us from New York, as I said. So good morning. And she will give us an overview of the UN SDG monitoring, past, present, and future. Over to you, Young-hee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for inviting me to this Eurostat webinar. And can you show my presentations? Thank you. Yeah. Congratulations on the publication of the Eurostat European SDG reports. And so my topic is on US SDG monitoring, past, present, and future. Next slide, please. So I would like to briefly mention what's the past. So before the SDG monitoring, we have the Millennium Development Goals, which was developed for a global development agenda for 2000 to 2015. And for the MDGs, we have only 8 goals and 21 target and use 60 indicators to monitor. And it was mentioned that this development goals was cooked in the UN basement. So basically, it's a top-down approach. We also have this called interagency and expert group on MDG indicators, but mainly they composed of international agencies. Next slide, please. So moving forward for the next development agenda, I think we already heard it's the new global development agenda for 2050 to 2030. For this new agenda, we have 17 goals and 169 targets, and currently we use 231 indicators to monitor it. So behind this, the system to monitor this indicator is the global SDG indicator frameworks. Next slide, please. And so this monitoring framework was mandated by the 2030 Agenda for Global Monitoring since 2015. And based on the mandate from the 2030 Agenda, the UN Statistical Commission established this interagency and expert group on SDG indicators in 2015. So this expert group consists of statistical experts from 28 member states. So each member state actually represents a sub-regions, like a sub-regional group of country. So when we do a consultation on any indicators, the member is supposed to consult the neighboring country that they represent. So since the establishment of the IAG SDGs, the group has been very actively working for the past, I think, almost 10 years for now. And we went through many rounds of consultation on the indicators. So the current indicator contains 231 unique indicators. Total is, I think, 248, but we have with what we call multi-purpose indicator, which is one indicator can serve for different targets. So all this, each and every one of the SDG goals and the targets are monitored by at least 1 to 3 indicators. This indicator framework was officially adopted by the UN General Assembly in July 2017. The global indicators are annually refined. Mainly, there's a minor tweak on the names or small methodologies, but also comprehensively reviewed by the UN Statistical Commission in 2020, and the next one will be 2025. And the IAG is currently actually undertaken the 2025 comprehensive review. Next slide, please. So the main task of the IAG SDG is a regular review, the methodologic development of the indicators, and also the issue related to metadata and also other monitoring issue on the indicators. The group also work on a couple of special issues. The group will create a work stream on data disaggregation, and also have a dedicated working group. Currently, there are 2 on geospatial information and SDMX. There was another one on interlinkage, which they finished their task a couple years ago. The IAG also created a task force on sustainable tourism because there's a couple issues on monitoring sustainable tourism. This task team was established 2 years ago. I think the task team aimed to finish the work by this year to propose some indicator proposal for the 2025 review. The group also shares the experience and best practice on SDG monitoring. And mainly different from the MDG monitoring is a country taking the leading role and deciding on the SDG indicator framework work. Next slide, please. So this one is a flow chart, basically how the data flow from country level to the global level. At the country level, the National Statistical System collects the data from the different ministry and from the statistical office. And some countries also work with the CSOs, private sector, and academia. They provide the data and metadata to international agency, which we call the custodian agencies. And the international agency ensure the data are comparable. If they're not, they do some adjustment. And also, when the data not exists, the international agency also do estimates, but they also send back the adjusted or estimated data back to the country to check. And then after the quality control of the data and ensure they're international comparable, the custodian agency supply all the data to UN Statistical Division to the Global SDG Indicator Database. Next slide, please. So basically, over the years, the number of data records in the global indicator has increased tremendously. So we only had 3,300 data points in 2016. I think currently by today we have 2.9 million data points. And we work closely with around 50 international and regional organizations on the global SDG reporting. And also the number of indicators included in the global indicator database has increased from 115 in 2016 to currently 229 in 2024. And next slide, please. And in addition to the improvements in data coverage, there's also significant improvement in terms of the methodological development. And because of many of the SDGs targets are not measurable, so in 2016, we have almost 40% of the SDG indicator do not have internationally established methodology. And after the 2020 review, all indicators has an international comparable, international established methodology. So basically, I don't know if colleague familiar with, we classified the indicator to 3 tier. Tier 1 is the conceptual clear, has international agreed methodology, but also have a good country coverage. Tier 2 is conceptual clear, but do not have sufficient country coverage. Tier 3 with no international established methodology. So over the years, the tier 1 indicator increased from 36% to 60, I think 9% at the end of last year. So basically, SDG offer a space for many of the development of the statistic indicators, particularly on many of the political sensitive indicators. Next slide, please. Despite all the progress, we still have a lot of persistent data gaps and many challenges in terms of the geographic coverage, timeliness of the data, and also in terms of disaggregation and in the area particular concerns. For some of the cross-cutting goals, such as goal 5, goal 13, and goal 16, less than half of the 193 member states have international compared data since 2015. And next slide, please. So what are some of the lessons learned and the benefit of having a global SDG indicator framework? The global indicator framework provide a standardized set of indicators that country can use to monitor and report on progress towards SDGs. This helps create a common global language for measure and compare sustainable development outcome. It also promotes data harmonization, comparability, and transparency across country. And the second is the SDG indicator framework also stimulate effort to improve data collections and availability, particularly in the area where data gaps previously exist. It also helps improve the quality of the data because the framework provides a clear definition methodology for collecting and reporting the data on the SDG. It has led to increased investment in data infrastructure, statistical capacity building, and the development of new data collection methods and technology. And third, the framework promotes evidence-based decision-making and enable the policymaker to assess the impacts of policy and intervention and track progress over time and design targeted intervention and allocate resource based on the data-driven insights. The framework enhances the accountability and transparency by enabling governments, civil society organization, and other stakeholders to check and monitor progress towards SDG. So the framework also actually helped to raise awareness of the SDGs because it has made it easy for people to understand what the SDGs are and how they can be achieved. In addition, I won't elaborate the indicator framework provides increase gives the National Statistics Office a coordination role, but in many countries this challenge still exists. So the data demand for the 2030 agenda has unleashed many data innovations, such as use non-traditional data sources, and geospatial information, citizen data, other social media data, big data. They also enabling building important partnerships through this inclusive data development in collaboration with the private sector, academia, and the civil society. And the last but not least, it promotes the increased openness and accessibility and effective use of data, which also help achieve better data impact. And next slide, please. So I just want to take the opportunity to announce the Global SDG Report 2024 will be launched next Thursday, exactly 1 week from now, and in New York. And we have a press briefing and in New York lunchtime 12:30. So we'll invite everyone to watch out for the launch of the new Global SDG Report. And next slide, please. So in addition to the report, we also have we call SDG extended report because the report is the official report is very concise and has very short stories, cover about 100 indicators. But behind that is the rich analysis that the custodian agency provide, cover all indicators and with a detailed analysis of the global and regional trend, and has more information and data and resource available. So we also create this extended report. The data and the data story also can be searched on this UN Data Commons for SDG and using natural language search functions. In addition, where I also have this global SDG database and where you can download all the data. So I'm aware of the time, so let me just quickly go through the next few slides. So next, I just want to mention there's a big opportunity in the coming months. In a couple of weeks, you will have this the high-level political forum, which will take place from 8 to 17 July. The focus that SDG goal on the discussion is goal 1, 2, 13, 16, and 17. And in September, and during the GA, there's a Summit of Future, which will take place at 22 to 23 September. This is a high-level event which bring the world leader together to forge a new international concern on how we deliver a better present and safeguard the future. So action-oriented pact of future will be endorsed by the heads of states at the summit. So currently, the member states are negotiating on this pact for the future. Next slide, please. Maybe a quick few lessons learned from the SDG monitorings. So the MDG monitor, we have 6 indicators. The SDG indicator, we have 231. Are there too many indicators or too few? Although there's 231, if you look at the target of the SDGs, we actually only covered some aspect of the target. So it's actually a lot of criticism that is reductionism with only 1 to 2 indicators to monitor the complexity of the targets. And the very limited involvement of the statistician in the developing the 2030 agenda. But we have this opportunity of 2025 review, provide us to review and reflect lessons learned and also prepare for the next global development agenda. So with that, I'm just want to give you this reference. I'm not going to elaborate. In the summit future, one measurement is was included in the current draft, which is the Beyond GDP. The Secretary General has outlined an ambitious agenda and also provide a policy brief on this Beyond GDP measurement. And I will just have the link here. I'm not going to elaborate, but this is just want to mention this is probably also linked to the future of the monitoring and the development agenda if this is approved in the September in the summit future. Next slide, please. So this Beyond GDP will be confirmed the political commitment to develop a concept framework to value what counts, anchored in the 2030 agenda. And also it's a dashboard approach, use no more than 10 to 20 indicators, and also emphasize resource for strength and capacity building. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yang-Yi, for outlining the global background and especially the next steps. Very interesting to hear what is happening at UN level. Now we are going to dive into the details of the EU monitoring, and I welcome Friederike Oehler, team leader in Eurostat for Sustainable Development Indicators, and she will present the key findings of the 2024 EU SDG monitoring report. Over to you, Friederike.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. I have been the team leader of the EU SDG monitoring teams for exactly 1 year now, and I'm pleased to present you the results of this year's monitoring exercise. I'll turn on my slides here. I would like to stress that we are monitoring the UN SDG goals, but we have translated the indicators and targets into an EU context. In cooperation with other services of the European Commission, national statistical institutes, and the civil society, we have selected a set of 102 EU indicators, 6 for each goal, that are based on the objectives and ambitions of the UN goals, but focus on what's relevant for the EU. Nevertheless, 2/3 of our indicators are aligned with the UN indicators. We give priority to indicators that are also used to monitor key EU policies, such as the European Pillar of Social Rights and the climate law. 26 of our indicators are assessed against an EU policy target. About a quarter is relevant for more than one of the 17 goals. And it goes without saying that all indicators need to fulfill high standards of statistical quality. You see here the overview of this year's results with data referring mainly to the 5-year period up to 2022 and 2023. I will present some of the goals in more detail, but you can already see that we have made significant progress in the socio-economic area, where we need to make more effort on the environmental goals. Now that the impact of the COVID pandemic is fully visible in our health indicators, SDG 3 has also fallen back, whereas the impacts of the global energy market disruption is taking a toll on SDG 7. You can see here the two best performing goals, SDG 10 and SDG 8. For SDG 10, reduced inequalities, we find record values for most of the indicators. The most recent 2021 income data show that income inequalities and the relative median at risk of poverty gap have decreased to the lowest values in our entire time series. Likewise, the disparities in EU's member states' GDP per capita and household income have continuously decreased since the year 2000 to reach a record low in 2023. For SDG 8, we find a record high employment rate of 75% in 2023, which means that we are well on track to reach the 2030 target of 78%. The share of young people neither in employment nor in education and training is at an all-time low, which means that the 2030 target of 9% is within reach. GDP per capita has stagnated in 2023. But it still grew by an annual 0.9% on average since 2018. Significant progress has also been made on SDG 1. Most poverty indicators show very positive developments over the 5-year period assessed, and fewer people are overburdened by their housing costs. However, we need to make more progress to reach the target of lifting at least 15 million people out of poverty by 2030. And it's also worrying that the share of people reporting unmet needs for medical care is increasing in several countries, mostly due to financial constraints. This slide shows goals where the EU has made moderate progress, which means that some indicators improved while others stagnated or showed a negative trend. This is the case for 9 out of 17 goals, and I will only cite a few examples here. In SDG 2, we note that agricultural production is becoming more sustainable, but intensive agricultural practices are still taking a toll on the environment, as shown, for instance, by the continued decline in farmland bird populations. In SDG 11, the quality of life in cities and communities is generally on the rise, but we need to step up our effort for sustainable mobility, reducing road traffic deaths and increasing the share of public transport. Higher recycling rates of municipal waste are also needed if we are to meet our target of a 60% reuse and recycling of municipal waste by 2030. Slight progress has been made for SDG 13 and SDG 6. Compared to 1990, the EU has managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 31%, but based on past trends, more efforts will be required to reach the very ambitious target set for 2030. Policy measures are already in place to deliver these additional efforts, mainly through the Fit for 55 package, which is revising the EU emissions trading system. The EU has also set ambitious targets for 2030 in the area of energy efficiency and renewable energies. The share of renewables in the EU's energy consumption has grown steadily since 2017, although not sufficiently yet. Likewise, average CO2 emissions from new cars have fallen, with further reductions being expected. Financing for the transition towards climate neutrality has increased. In SDG 6, progress has been made on sanitation. On the other hand, phosphate concentrations in rivers have increased strongly. There are less inland bathing sites with excellent water quality, and water scarcity is a concern. The global energy market disruption caused by Russia's war against Ukraine had severe consequences for SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. As such, the refilling of gas stocks in 2022 that were particularly low after the first winter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has increased the EU's energy import dependency. High energy prices challenged the access to affordable energy. The EU reduced its energy consumption sharply in 2022. However, these savings have been insufficient to meet the ambitious targets. Very strong progress has been made for energy productivity, which means the economic output produced per unit of gross available energy. SDG 3, good health and well-being, has fallen back due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic that are fully visible in the data of this year's report. COVID has increased avoidable mortality strongly and impacted indicators on healthy lives. Other causes of death developed positively, despite the reduction of road traffic deaths being insufficient to meet the EU's target. The assessment of SDG 15, life on land, remains unfavorable, showing a further worsening in the situation compared with previous editions. On the positive side, an improvement of the biochemical oxygen demand in rivers. However, developments in the areas of biodiversity and land degradation are worrying. The increase in terrestrial protected areas is insufficient to meet the 2030 target. Common bird and grassland butterfly populations continue to decline, and increasingly large areas are impacted by droughts. The European Commission has proposed important policy initiatives to reverse the degradation of ecosystems as part of the European Green Deal, the EU Biodiversity Strategy, the EU Forest Strategy, and the EU Soil Strategy for 2030. In addition to the monitoring of annual indicators that come with a certain time lag, we are also taking a glimpse on some recent monthly and quarterly data that show impacts onto the SDGs. As such, the inflation that followed the economic disruptions triggered by the Russian aggression has been felt by all European consumers. The harmonized index of consumer prices shows how the sharp increase in energy prices was followed by an increase of prices for other consumption items that has continued until March 2024. The increase of prices for essential items like food and energy, but also rentals, are weighing heavily on the poor. These developments are not yet reflected in data available from household surveys. This graph, showing monthly data of EU imports of energy products, illustrates how the EU successfully reduced its dependency from Russian oil and gas to merely 5% of its total imports. By diversifying its energy trade partners and increasing the share of renewable energies, the EU warrants its energy security. This year, for the first time, we have put the EU's progress into perspective by comparing the EU with other major economies of the world for 6 indicators from the UN indicator list. And I will show you only 2 examples here, but you will find the others in the report. One example is the share of persons at risk of monetary poverty after social transfers. The EU holds the record in this comparison, although we need to acknowledge that data are not available for the same income year for all the countries. Another example shows a comparison of total greenhouse gas emissions in 2021. While the EU's per capita emissions of CO2 in 2021, which are visible on the y-axis of the graph, are lower than in many other major economies, its total emissions on the x-axis are slightly larger than for India, for example, whose population is more than 3 times the EU population. Note that the size of the bubbles represents the cumulative emissions over the 2000 to 2021 period. The EU comes third after China and the US in this comparison. Finally, we are looking at the EU's spillover effects. That means the impact that EU consumption produces on other parts of the world. We analyze 4 types of spillover effects: the CO2 footprint, the material footprint, land footprint, and gross value added generated outside the EU. In 2021, the EU's population was 447 million people, which equaled 5.7% of the world population in that year. More than 9% of the global CO2 emissions could be traced back to EU consumption. This means that the EU generates a disproportionately high share of the world's emissions when compared with its share of the global population. The good news, however, is that since 2016, the EU managed to reduce its CO2 footprint by 4.6%. On the last slide, you find the QR code to our website, where you will find our 2024 monitoring report, a brochure including some fun visuals, and several other products of our SDG communication package. The website also includes all data and a methodological paper where you can find the details on how our assessments are calculated. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Friederike. You have made a really thorough look through the data we have and provided very interesting details. So I'm sure that there will be even more questions about more detailed findings. We have already received a lot of questions, but I encourage you to enter more questions. You see the code on the screen. But we will try to address as many as we can here on the spot. But if we don't manage to answer all of them, we will come back in writing, and you can find then the answers in Slido. So the first question I have here is for SDG 4, education. Can we achieve the different targets until 2030? How realistic is that? And I would ask Yong-Yi to give the global perspective and then Friederike the EU perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. At the global level, and we know that many of the goals are very ambitious, in particular for many of the developing countries, and also some of the targets are not specific. So UNESCO a couple of years ago have this campaign called national benchmarking. So basically we invite all countries to look at all the targets and then benchmarking and based on their national circumstance. So set up a basically national targets. So based on that, a lot of the country, I think over 140 countries already submitted their national benchmarking against the SDG 4. So based on that, there's a kind of more realistic target at the national level. So back to you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, no, thank you very much for this question. So for the EU SDG monitoring, we cover SDG 4. In SDG 4, we have actually 4 indicators for which we assess progress against explicit policy targets set by the EU. And out of these 4 indicators, there are 2 indicators that are assessed showing very significant progress, which means the rate of change is definitely sufficient to reach the respective target in 2030. These two indicators are the early leavers from education and training in the age group 18 to 24, and the tertiary education attainment for 25 to 64-year-olds. So here we are definitely on track. Now, the other two indicators for which we have policy targets in SDG 4, unfortunately, they are not progressing into the right direction. So these are the low achieving 15-year-olds that are low achieving in reading, maths, or sciences. And the other indicator is the share of the population having at least basic digital skills. And there we have only 55% of the population currently, whereas the target is at 80%. So we're too far away to reach it currently.
Thank you very much for this detailed answer. Maybe in general, I would like to recall that Eurostat's role is to monitor. We are not responsible for implementing the policies or developing new policies, because we have received quite a lot of questions also about what are you doing in order to achieve the objectives. Unfortunately, we cannot address these questions today, but yes, I mean, as we said, as Arturo already pointed out at the beginning, there are a lot of new policies, and they are aiming to implement and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, another question, and that's also a bit a bigger picture question, and therefore I would ask Arturo to reply. So what measures are being implemented to monitor synergies between the SDGs and climate action, mitigation and adaptation?
Yeah, thank you for this question about synergies. It's clear that some policy measures are beneficial for SDGs and also for climate action. The question is rather how to quantify them. And this is something we are studying. We are working on it. We are developing experimental techniques or results for us to quantify these contributing factors common to SDGs and to climate change. This is work in progress. We are using a technique called decomposition analysis that is well known in the research literature. If you Google decomposition analysis, you will find many results about particular applications for energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, but it is a mathematical technique that can be used for other approaches. So we are experimenting with this decomposition analysis technique, and we are not satisfied yet with the results we are getting, but we continue working on it. And I am confident in a future Eurostat report, we will be able to show results based on this technique that quantifies the contribution factors to phenomena such as the SDGs and climate action. Perhaps this could be included in the next year or a future year Eurostat SDG report, or in other reports that we are also preparing. For instance, we are working right now on a report about the climate change mitigation that will be published by the end of the year.
Thank you very much. Then next question. What are the EU countries' update for SDG 3, target 3.8 indicators, so 3.8.1 and 3.8.2? So these are the specialists, and I would ask Friederike to reply and also explain probably what is behind these numbers.
Yes, thank you, Christine. So in this case, we do not measure exactly these UN targets, but what we do monitor for the EU is the unmet needs for medical care. Unfortunately, over the last 5 years of available data, this indicator was moving away from the goal. And that means we had quite an increase of self-reported unmet needs for medical care. In 2022, there were 2.2% of the EU population which reported an unmet need for medical care, mostly due to financial reasons, long waiting lists, or travel distance. So yes, unfortunately, financial constraints are the most common reason why people report this unmet need for medical examinations.
Thank you very much. Then the next question, also for Friederike, are there practices and results on local or urban level?
Thank you, Christine. We do indeed have a bunch of indicators with regional breakdowns at NUTS 2 level. For example, the people at risk of poverty or social exclusion, or participation in early childhood education, but also some of the environmental indicators like the area at risk of severe soil erosion by water. And you can find all those published on our website with the regional breakdowns. However, we do not have regional data for all our indicators, and we also do not assess the progress made by the regions. This is definitely far beyond our mandate. But yes, you can find the regional breakdown for some indicators on our website, and Eurostat also publishes other complementary reports with regional data, most importantly, the annual regional yearbook. And further to that, I mean, we're engaged in developing new indicators based on Earth observation, and maybe big data will also open doors for new indicators in the future, but we are not there yet.
Thank you very much. Then the next question I can take myself. How can we ensure that by focusing on reducing CO2 and moving productions back to Europe, we don't deprive developing countries from their means of living? Well, as I said, I mean, that's also a bit of a policy question, but I will focus on the statistical part of the answer, let's say. So what we have in our report is we have CO2 footprints, which means that we measure the CO2 emissions which are linked to consumption in the EU. So you can trace back also to production outside of the EU. And then on the other hand, we also, as you have seen before in the presentation, we have also a kind of footprint for gross value added. So this shows how much value added is generated in these countries or outside the EU. So we are measuring it, let's say. Then how to ensure that, as I said, that's our colleagues from the policy DGs who have to develop these policies. But we are also then working on more environmental footprints and social footprints. So we are providing the data side and for our colleagues then. Then the next question. The UN SDG monitoring report will be released the end of June or next week. Can you already reveal some of its key findings, Young-Yi?
Yeah, sure. Because the SDG report is actually, we have we call parliamentary report, the SDG official report is already out. So basically the report reveals that with 6 years to go, only 17% of the SDG targets that can be accessed are on track, with nearly half of the target showing minimal or moderate progress, which means the acceleration is needed, and over 1/3 of the target are either stalled or has been regressed. So basically, the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, the escalating conflicts around the world, the geopolitical tension, and the growing climate chaos have severely hindered the progress. The report gave the details on the each goals, basically focus on some of the key findings for each goals. But we also provide what's the priority for the UN and the global level. So basically, the Secretary General called urgent priority in a couple areas. The first is peace and security, and the number of the forced displaced people have reached unprecedented level, and currently I think near 120 million by last month. And resolving the ongoing conflict through dialogue and diplomacy is essential. The second is financial support for the most vulnerable country. Many developing countries require more financial resources and physical space. So reforming the global financial architecture is crucial to unlock the volume of finance required for sustainable development. And a third is massive investment and in effective partnership needed to drive the critical transition, such as in food, energy, social protection, digital connection, and much more. The report also offered a lot of example of successes and resilience that can be built upon through decisive actions.
Thank you very much for this sneak preview of the results. Then the next question is for the new indicator 370 in the Eurostat report. So that's the consumption of antibiotics. The value decreased over the last 5 years, but the trend is marked with a red arrow. Is this good or bad?
I think this question is for me, probably. So obviously, a red arrow is bad. Now, to explain it more in detail, in actually this indicator 370, it's as the person asking the question noticed, it's a new indicator. It's the consumption of antibiotics in the community and hospital sectors, and it has decreased a little bit, this consumption of antibiotics. It has decreased a little bit, so it's a good thing. However, we are assessing this indicator against a policy target, and the decrease has not been good enough to reach the target. And this is why the assessment with a halfway downward looking red arrow, which means the progress is insufficient to reach the EU target.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I think we have the time for one final question for Arturo. So on Monday, the nature restoration law was adopted. Will this change the EU SDG monitoring?
Well, somehow, indirectly, and in a few years, not yet. The nature restoration law includes some targets for restoration of EU environment. It doesn't include indicators or data reporting to measure the progress in those targets. However, in parallel and independently from the nature restoration law, we have developed new statistics about ecosystem accounts that are also going to measure the condition or degradation of ecosystems. And these new statistics are created to measure the targets of the nature restoration law. So we are going to be able to measure the progress for the targets of the nature restoration law. And this is going to be new information that will be deployed in the next years, probably not for 25, but just for 26. And when we have more information, we can include these new indicators in the SDG dashboard and include them in the report. So eventually, we are going to improve the quality of information that we have, and it will have an impact in our report, but not in next year.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I think we are coming to the end of our webinar because time is running and we have still to wrap up. So I would like to thank all the speakers and also the audience for the interesting questions. We had a very good exchange and we touched on a lot of topics, but I invite everybody to have a look at the Eurostat website because there's much more information, obviously, and much more details. And as I said, if you have more specific questions, you can always contact us. In general, from a political point of view, I think we're living in an interesting time. And now with the next commission, I hope that they will keep the SDGs as their political compass. Time will tell us what will happen in the next weeks. And we will continue to provide the data for our political masters to make the right decisions. In general, I would like to invite the audience to answer a short survey via Slido to give us feedback on the event. And if you have further questions, we are available. The address of our multilingual user support will be posted in Slido, so you can contact us there. And you will also find in the report and on the website, obviously, you have all our contact details. So thanks a lot for your interest in following our webinar. I hope you learned something interesting, and I wish you a good end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.